Jovin Estrada Villanueva was one of thousands of Hondurans who came to the United States in recent years to ask for asylum. He was denied protection and deported, and then he was killed by the people he fled. We went to Honduras to understand how something like that could happen in a system meant to protect the world's most vulnerable. Jovin had left Honduras because he was receiving threats after witnessing a murder. After he returned, those threats came back. He was shot while driving his mototaxi through an area contested by multiple gangs. Like Jovin, most Honduran asylum seekers lose their cases and are ordered deported. Cases related to gang violence are particularly difficult to win because of the way the US government generally interprets asylum law. We don't know how many deported asylum seekers have been killed. But in Honduras, stories like Jovin's are really common, especially in neighborhoods like the one he grew up in. Jovin is from Choloma, a city just outside San Pedro Sula. Over the past few decades, his neighborhood has grown haphazardly and with little civic planning because many people moved to the region to work in nearby clothing factories. Even today, there is a severe lack of social services. People who live there have little access to electricity and potable water. Roads are unpaved and difficult to navigate. There aren't enough teachers for schools, and access to childcare is all but non-existent. In many ways, neighborhoods like Jovin's feel abandoned by the government. And in the government's absence, gangs have moved in to claim territory. For Jovin and his friends, refuge came in the form of hip-hop. Jovin was known as B-Boy Ross 1. He was a dancer and mentor to many in the country's growing hip-hop scene.
Jovin era un activista hip hop, era un joven que motivaba el cambio y todo esto, aunque parezca increíble, como yo le digo a muchas personas, era a través del baile, que cualquiera puede decir de que el baile solo es una forma de entretenerse, pero él y nosotros nunca lo vimos como una simple forma de entretenerse, sino que es algo que nos ayuda a trascender la conciencia, a volvernos fuertes porque nos une, el baile nos une, el hip hop nos une.
It's not surprising to see hip hop resonating in Honduras when you consider its origins. Hip hop was born in the South Bronx in the 1970s. People who lived there, who were mostly Black and Latino, were also facing government abandonment and gang takeovers. They also faced aggressive over-policing. You were assumed to be a criminal just for living there, criminalized for being poor and a person of color. The same can be said today for people who live in many neighborhoods around San Pedro Sula. A youth movement grew out of these conditions in the Bronx. These young people who had been left to fend for themselves dared to say, "My existence matters, I matter, we matter." And that was the beginning of hip hop.
Y es justamente en ese contexto donde también viene a nacer aquí el hip hop. Viene esa semilla del hip hop aquí a Chamelecón y da esa oportunidad que no había.
Mira cómo lo hago porque sabes paranoia. Cada vez que vengo haciendo un estilo que suena en olla. Quieres competir conmigo y te doy paranoia. Ya acabó tu tiempo, pasaste a hacer historia.
Jovin was at the center of that youth movement in Honduras, and his death rippled through the entire country's hip hop community.
Cuando me mandaron a mí la noticia pues, de que había sido asesinado, de que habían acribillado a un mototaxista, así decía la prensa, ¿verdad? Pero yo digo, él no era solo un mototaxista, sino que era un joven que motivaba el cambio. Y él era de los que creían que lo que hacemos los hombres también lo pueden hacer las mujeres.
Jovin was known for teaching B-girls in particular. That's not common in breaking globally. B-girls often face discrimination, so the fact that Jovin really took the time to encourage and train women is significant. One of his students, Jency Fresh, is now one of the best B-girls in Central America. She remembers the way that her mentor used to encourage young people to join their practices to keep them away from the gangs.
Cuando veas a una persona bailando, es un delincuente menos. porque aunque no lo creas, el baile te aparta, te ocupa tu mente y aparte de eso es saludable para tu vida. O sea, haces un ejercicio que te va a ayudar mucho en tu vida. Entonces, yo siempre decía eso. El día 8 de agosto, cuando pasó, estaba específicamente en este lugar, porque iba a entrenar, como ya mencionado, él iba a venir a entrenar con nosotros. Cuando recibí la llamada, yo dije, ¿aló? Y me dice, ¿te diste cuenta? Asesinaron a Jovi. En ese momento se me aflojó todo mi cuerpo, caí al suelo, no podía respirar, me había quedado así paralizada. Yo dije, no, pero qué imposible. Pero fue muy duro para nosotros.
Shortly after Jovin was killed, 3 more mototaxi drivers were killed in the same area. The transportation industry is extremely vulnerable to gang extortion because it's an all-cash business. Attacks on transportation workers have happened for years. Alex Diaz Zavala used to own and operate a minibus company in a town outside of San Pedro Sula. His sons all drove for him. But after one of his sons was beaten in front of him, he decided he had to send all of his children north to the United States. The woven shoes hanging from his rearview mirror serve as a reminder of his children. The craft, made from plastics like soap boxes and snack wrappers, is a common way for detainees to pass the time while in U.S. immigration custody.
Pues los envía ya por miedo de que de repente ya me habían golpeado uno y dije yo si no, tal vez no solo me los van a golpear, me los pueden matar. Entonces preferí yo mejor mandarlos a ellos para allá. Un viaje para allá es bien arriesgado, súper arriesgado. O sea, arriesgan hasta la vida los que van para allá, entonces no creas, todo eso es, había que pensarlo, pero antes de que verlos, a que me les pasara algo aquí, yo preferí mejor, digo yo, mandarlos allá.
One of his sons, Ángel Diaz, was deported back to Honduras. About a month later, he was shot dead driving a minibus.
Cuando a mí me avisan de que a él lo habían tiroteado, ligerito salimos todos. Fuimos a verlo ahí a él y pues me tocó levantarlo a mí y igualmente él murió en mis brazos. No crea que eso ha sido lo más duro que ha pasado.
We visited Angel's grave with him. He brought along one of Angel's daughters, who helps him keep it clean. Jovin's family also took us to see his grave. They were afraid to be fully identified because of what happened to him. The family is still so full of grief. They moved away after Jovin's death, but they've filled the walls of their new home with memories of him.
Aquí en Honduras, el gobierno de Honduras no le garantizó sus derechos al trabajo, su derecho a la cultura, a la libre expresión. Fue a Estados Unidos a pedir apoyo y tampoco lo ayudaron allá, sino que lo regresaron acá. Y estando acá, el Estado de Honduras nuevamente fue incapaz de garantizar el derecho a la vida.